stranger is one of the most basic tenets of Judaism because, as we all know, we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. We've been strangers many times since, and yet somehow we have found our way to two promised lands and found refuge there, here in the United States of America and in Israel. Not all immigrants and refugees have a homeland that they can return to escape persecution the way that the Jewish community now has in these two extraordinary places. In fact, most immigrants and refugees are fleeing or otherwise leaving their homelands. And given our collective story and our history, we as American Jews must work to ensure that others have the same abilities all of our families have had in coming to America. And for many American Jews, getting access to the American dream, all its challenges notwithstanding. So it's been a privilege to partner with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, who has been doing this work of helping to resettle immigrants and refugees all over the world for more than 100 years. Their tagline really speaks to me and to all of us in the Zioness community. We used to take refugees because they were Jewish. Now we take them because we are Jewish. National Refugee Shabbat is a moment for congregations, organizations, and individuals across the country to celebrate the contributions of refugees, raise awareness in our communities, and reaffirm our commitment to fighting for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers everywhere. We are so thrilled to welcome so many incredible speakers tonight, and we're going to start with Robert Aronson, who we're so privileged to have as the current board chair of HIAS. Bob is a Minneapolis-based attorney who has represented hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers from around the world, and is now, as I said, the chair of the board of directors of HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the global Jewish nonprofit that protects refugees. Aronson has served on the HIAS board for 28 years and brings to the role 4 decades of legal experience, as well as a deep commitment to refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm extra thrilled to introduce Donnie Kopstein-Fisher, who will be interviewing Bob for the first part of our program. Donnie is one of our rock star Twin Cities chapter leaders at Zioness, and it's because of her and her co-leaders in Minneapolis that we have this program and this incredible partnership with HIAS that we're so proud of. So Donnie and Bob, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. So Bob, we first engaged with one another. I think we met about 1.5 years ago. We are both living here in Minnesota, and we were both interested in the cause of immigration and refugees. And at that time, as you'll recall, there was a lot of media attention around what was going on at our southern border.
Legal experience, as well as a deep commitment to refugees.
There's an echo. Okay. So Bob, what we here at Zioness in the Twin Cities had hoped to do was work with partners in our community, like the JCRC, NCJW, Jewish Community Action, and a number of synagogues to bring more attention to the question of what can Jews do to help immigrants and refugees. You and I met at that time, and we started a conversation that's now led to this moment. I wonder if you can help us understand a little bit more about how HIAS initiated the concept of Refugee Shabbat and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Thanks, Danny. And just as an introductory word, thank you very much, Zioness. I feel so privileged to be appearing with you on this program with Refugee Shabbat. HIAS, as you had said, Danny, is an organization well over 100 years old, dedicated to a single proposition, that is to extend welcome to the stranger, to believe fervently that individuals should not be persecuted based on who they are, but rather that this is an imperative for us to recognize the common humanity that links us all. Or in the words of Martin Luther King, the notion that we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Refugee Shabbat, in the highest scheme of things, it's a HIAS initiative, and I've come up with really kind of 7 reasons that this is really foundational to who we are as a Jewish community. So let me run through at least my litany of why I think this is such an important event. First of all, Refugee Shabbat is a reminder of the commandment in the Torah, 36 times that we are commanded to love and welcome the stranger. There are two implications to this. First of all, this responsibility to love the stranger, it is our responsibility. It is not the sovereign. It cannot be delegated. It is something foundational to you and to me. And another thing is that the Torah strikes, it really is legislating an internal feeling. It is not saying how we should act but it's rather a prescriptive commandment. You should love the stranger. And that gets into the second important moment for Refugee Shabbat, which is this represents an affirmation that there's really no hierarchy in human value. It's an affirmation of the Hebraic commandment, Shalom Elohim, that we're all conceived in the image of God. Again, reinforcing this notion that there's no hierarchy of human value. Number three, foundational to the Jewish experience is our experience with persecution, displacement, migration, resilience. These are core elements of our shared background as Jews. And there's an imperative really to invoke memory, because without memory, really, in Elie Wiesel's statement, there can be no hope. So it's important for us to unearth this element of our common background. Number four, this is an opportunity on a very intimate level for us to connect with our own ancestral stories, our own ancestral narrative, because the Jewish experience in America is predominantly permeated with the refugee experience, Jews escaping persecution to start new lives. Another thing which makes this an important shared communal experience of Refugee Shabbat is that what we are doing today, it's community relations. You had mentioned, Danny, the work of the JCRC as an important actor in the work of Zioness and the work of refugee protection. Well, what HIAS does in reaching out to other refugee communities, we're doing the same thing. We are trying to change. We're not solely trying to save lives. We are. I mean, that's our predominating ethos. But in addition, we're changing the narrative of how people look at Jews. And one other thing in terms of Refugee Shabbat is Jews have an immense impact on the refugee program in the United States. The refugee program, which is the recognition that humanitarian protection should be an important element in the US immigration system. It really dates from the enactment it's called the Refugee Act of 1951, which was an outgrowth really of the Shoah. It was a revulsion to the fact that there was no mechanism in US immigration law to recognize humanitarian intervention as being a legitimate ground for protection. And it's really as a result of that we have the refugee program. And this is one way to honor and to reaffirm our commitment to refugee program. And then lastly, obviously, we're in an era, an era of ongoing anti-Semitism, nationalism, xenophobia, hate. The ADL chronicles a spike in hate crimes directed toward Jews, directed toward Asian Americans, directed toward the other. And there's something affirming, there's something morally obligatory to intervening. It's in some ways it's an affirmation of the statement of Martin Niemöller, who was saying, you know, they came for the communists and I wasn't a communist, I stayed silent. And they came for the socialists and I was silent. They came for the Jews and I was silent. And then they came for me and no one was there to protect. So this is a powerful set of values that we are trying to espouse in Refugee Shabbat. And it's for that reason we at HIAS are so grateful and respectful of Zioness in partnering with us and organizing and reaching into the community. So thank you.
Thank you. So Zioness is one partner. I know synagogues around this country, and I believe in Canada as well, also partner on Refugee Shabbat, starting tonight and going through tomorrow evening, possibly programming on Sunday as well, all in an effort to bring to people the stories of individual refugees, the history of HIAS, and the current situation, what's happening here and what's happening around the world with respect to global migration, refugees, and policy here in the United States. I know we'll touch on all of those in this conversation. What else is HIAS currently doing besides Refugee Shabbat?
We have a pretty full slate of activities. You know, HIAS is the expression of the American Jewish community dedicated to refugee protection. And, you know, it's really amazing and affirming and spiritually uplifting, frankly, is that coming out of this sliver of the American population has been created really one of the most acknowledged, awarded, and impactful refugee rights organizations in the world. We are active in, I mean, we work really in three theaters. I know this is going to come back as a future discussion, but let me just kind of raise it to begin with. HIAS is active in three theaters of activity. Number one, we're one of 9 agencies that administer the U.S. refugee program, resettlement program. That is, we bring individuals facing persecution consistent with U.S. immigration laws to the United States, create programs in conjunction with local partners, leading to individuals reclaiming their lives. And this is an area which is undergoing substantial transformation under the current administration and liberalization. Number two, we work globally. We work in 16 countries on 5 continents, providing refugee protection to about 1.5 million people. And what do? Well, we're very active in South America, largely with the Venezuelan refugee situation, which is the second largest refugee population in the world now. But we also work with individuals from the Northern Triangle, Nicaragua, Colombia, to provide refugee protection. In Greece, we provide legal services for individuals, largely refugees from the conflict in Syria, seeking admission to the European Union. So we present asylum applications. In Kenya, in Chad, we work with Somali refugees, Sudanese, Darfurians, on basic protections, largely related to legal protection, to mental health, because so many refugees face tremendous trauma. We are the lead worldwide agency dealing with sexual predation, the prevention of gender-based violence, so we provide emergency services for people fleeing, which could be water, sanitation, food, and so on. Our work is expansive, and then We are also present in Mexico. In fact, we're the only agency having offices on both sides of the border in Mexico and in the United States. And now with the movement to dismantle or at least to diminish the stay in Mexico policy, to allow people to come into the United States to present their claims for persecution, HIAS is quite involved because HIAS is the only agency, the only faith-based agency with a memorandum of understanding with the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, designating us as the worldwide partner of the UN in the field of refugee protection. It's a tremendous honor. So all in all, Danny, and this is just a smattering of what we do, because we advocate, we engage with the communities, but we're a $90 million organization. We're funded by the U.S. government, mainly by the Department of State and Department of Health and Human Services, USAID. We're funded by the UN. We get private foundational money, Gates Foundation, Schusterman Foundation, and from the American Jewish community. So it is it's an incredibly vibrant organization and dedicated, and I tell you, the highest staff and I think board, for lack of a better word, we keep our eyes on the ball. I mean, it's a very, very serious and focused and dedicated agency, and one which it's not just that I'm extraordinarily proud to be associated with HIAS, but I think that the American Jewish community has tremendous cause to take a real level of pride in a belief that we are espousing and advancing Jewish interests, Jewish theological beliefs, and really keeping in touch with our values and our theological imperatives.
Bob, I sense the pride that you have in being able to be a part of the board, to be chairing the board at this time. And you talked about, as you said, just a sliver of the work that HIAS does, but it's a sliver that takes the organization around the globe, working with refugees and migrant populations literally all over the world. What have you seen in your time with HIAS in other parts of the world? And can you take us back and help us understand what are some of the global forces leading to such a mass migration of individuals?
You know, at present, there are 80 million individuals who fall within a general umbrella of refugees. This is the largest population in human history. And, it's somewhat akin, Danny, to, in Sweden, where there are different words for snowflakes, because that reflects the reality. In the refugee world, refugees are really an umbrella term. I mean, refugee is someone who's fleeing their home country. Internally displaced persons, IDP, is someone trapped in their home country, but they still need protection. Migrant, someone who is simply leaving. These are all words, and they're powerful words, and people do not want to leave their home countries unless they are forced. So what are the factors? I mean, the factors which are leading to this increase, it's nationalism, political oppression. There's, now we're dealing with climate change as transforming people's lives and destroying businesses. There are, food insecurity issues. There's, I think that there is a tendency in many cultures, and maybe it's even a universal, to distrust the other, to segment ourselves into kind of tribal communities, and others who are not within the tribe are therefore threatening or anathema. And we're really seeing this as the worldwide economy gets more and more stretched, where you have a tendency, a movement to preserve the the wealth, the tradition, the traditional traditions of a country. So what we're seeing is more and more refugees, and the safety net accorded to them is shrinking quite a bit. And this is where HIAS, and it's not just HIAS, it's other organizations as well, are trying to fill the gap. But it's a daunting task. But it's not getting any better.
I can only imagine. On the topic of potentially getting better, perhaps the forces that are driving migration and displacement and asylum seeking are not getting any better. But we spoke a little bit, Bob, last week about how the new administration here in the US is taking a different approach to immigration, starting with reunification of those families, children who were separated from their families at the border over the last 3 or 4 years. What is HIAS seeing with regard to immigration policies here in the US under the new administration? What are some of the opportunities and what are some of the challenges?
Well, it starts with a belief that there should be humanitarian values interwoven within the US immigration system. That is, that there should be a recognition that when bad things happen to people, that we cannot entirely close our eyes. So this is expressing itself in the opening days of the current administration in 3 main theaters. And let me tie it into the work of HIAS. First of all, there's a resuscitation of the refugee program. That is, each year, the president appears before Congress and declares the United States will accept a certain number of refugees. Traditionally, it's been anywhere from around 70,000 to 110,000 under the previous administration. The number got whittled down in the last year of the Trump administration. It had gone down to 15,000, and even so, we did not even meet that quota. Biden administration has said they want to set 125,000 annual quota for refugee admissions. And I should also note, I just want to get this in, that the big proponents in the US government of a strong, vibrant refugee program is the Department of Defense and the Department of State. They see this as being fundamental to the advancement of US foreign policy interests. And so if you're going from a system which was weazened and whittled down to 15,000 and trying to pump it up to 125,000, what does that mean? It means that resettlement agencies, migration agencies like HIAS have to figure out new ways to, because the refugee process starts abroad by identifying individuals and identifying what would be desirable resettlement opportunities. Where are they going to prosper? What's the infrastructure like? And then going back to the communities, and we're enlisting communities to recommit to the HIAS network so that HIAS can bring refugees to the United States, and then we place them in communities, and the resettlement program is largely accomplished, usually by Jewish Family and Children's Services. That's the first thing, revitalization of the refugee program. Secondly, is the administration has stated, the Biden administration has stated that, again, US interests are advanced if we can engage in regional stabilization programs to provide humanitarian relief abroad, particularly in South America, meaning that rather than having individuals come to the United States, individuals will find themselves recommitting to their own geography. Well, again, here we are the largest refugee rights organization in South America. We have a particular both capability and responsibility to try to effectuate stimulus, economic revitalization programs, social integration, making sure that the refugees have housing, kids have access to school, that individuals have are being provided with job skills and so on. So we're very active in that. And then the last thing is the Biden administration is and will continue to address policies on the southern border. And we're going to be very, very involved in furthering that policy objective. So, we did not set out 4 years ago to position ourselves to be so central to articulated policies of the current administration, but that's exactly what's happened. So it's going to be a busy 4 years, really busy.
I can imagine. You
So
sound up to the challenge.
Well, I don't know, but if we'll reconvene in a couple of years. I expect my hair to be gray, but it'll be worth it. So
mine might be as well.
Okay.
Bob, as you know, you and I connected again here in Minneapolis. We got you involved with Zioness. You got me involved with HIAS and the issues surrounding refugee protection. Not every Zioness chapter around the country is as fortunate to have a Bob Aronson.
Or a Danny Fisher. Wait a second.
Thank you.
Or a Danny Fisher.
So what can people listening to this conversation do? And really, what do you see? What does HIAS see? Whether one is a Zioness or not a Zioness, what does HIAS see as the role of Jewish communities and individual Jews beyond raising awareness?
Okay, I want to just kind of go over before, involving the other panelists. I'm really anxious to hear what they have to say, but let me just rattle off a couple ideas. First of all, refugee matters, they're highly politically charged. So keep in touch, get to know the issues, keep in touch with congressional representatives. We need strong voices advocating for asylum relief, for the professionalization of the immigration courts, for global humanitarian relief, for appropriate resettlement or refugee ceilings. That's number one. Number two, take a look, and I strongly suggest people to sign up for a Facebook group called Jews for Refugees. It's a wonderful group for generative thinking, for a group of like-minded individuals. Number three, if you go to the HIAS website, take a look at the events page. HIAS has a major outreach effort of webinars, of informational pieces that really can bring, they're fascinating in terms of what is being done to advance refugee protection. Really suggest you take a look at the events section. Number four, if you're in a position, if you have excess air miles, if that could be donated so the families can reunify, that's a great local initiative. Number five, contribute to bond funds to release immigrants from detention. There's no cause, and hopefully that will be addressed, by the way, politically. Hopefully we will not see the mere act of seeking asylum as being a criminal act, but we still have vestiges of that, and that's unconscionable. Next, most communities have refugees. Try to patronize refugee-owned businesses. Find out ethnic restaurants. There are sources to establish refugee-owned businesses. That's a great way to, number one, to support refugees and to get to know refugees. Many cities have offices of refugee and immigrant affairs. Check in with them. Minneapolis is a very, very active one, as does St. Paul, but Minneapolis, a woman named Michelle Rivero, and there's a lot of information on getting involved. You can join the HIAS Online Book and Film Club. Again, good way to interact with like-minded individuals. If you are conversant in Spanish and English, there may be opportunities to volunteer remotely in support of our border response team, dealing with refugees from South America who are either in Mexico or have recently arrived in the United States. If you're a lawyer, even if you're not an immigration attorney, there may be opportunities to appear and participate in pro bono projects for asylum protection. I'm hoping this is something on the drawing board that HIAS will have a Jewish-oriented pro bono national program, but in the absence, many communities have organizations dedicated or substantially concerned with pro bono representation. HIAS has also concluded, this is kind of interesting, concluded an agreement with Airbnb to let refugees who, for a certain period of time, find lodging at very low rates. There may be some opportunities to underwrite some of those lodging costs. And lastly, if you have used technology or baby items, that's a good opportunity to donate. And again, I think there are opportunities to do that. So anyway, those are just some thoughts, Danny.
That's quite a lot. I think we'll have to go back and maybe transcribe all of these ideas and get them on the National Zioness website. Amanda, it's something we can talk about. Bob, I know you're going to stay on for our next panel. I hope Amanda will draw on your expertise after we hear from Mohammed and Julio and Tali. I'm just so grateful to you for this partnership, for all the inspiration, and for giving us such a strong foundation with which to move forward. Thank you.
And the feeling of admiration and gratitude is quite mutual.
Thank you so much.
Before we spotlight our panelists, I just want to thank you both so much. We actually do have a list. We, as you both know, but not everyone on the call knows, we have a teen fellowship, and we did a teen fellow session on immigration and refugee protection just a week ago. And so we created a list of action items for them. And I worked with HIAS staff to, come up with some exciting options. One of the options was to join this event tonight, but it's a long list. And I did hear some new ones, Bob. So we will add to our list, and then we'll blast it out with our follow-up to thank everyone for coming to this event. And we really look forward to continuing to work with you, Bob, and with HIAS around the country. And just to thank you so much for partnering with us, and really for the totally extraordinary work you do. Hearing about the scope and breadth of the work of HIAS is really kind of breathtaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
So I am so excited to follow that conversation with three totally remarkable immigrants and or refugees who are joining us to tell us their stories. And Donnie and Bob really helped highlight the work of making sure that we in this country are supporting and advancing immigrants and refugees to America. So now we have people who can tell us their immigrant or refugee experience, and also to help us understand why this work is so important, how the rich tapestry of our country really demands that we make sure that immigrants and refugees find a home here. And also, as you will hear from these just truly incredible people who I feel so privileged and grateful to call my friends and partners in this work, they are contributing so fundamentally to the United States. The work that they're into the world, the work that they're doing is just, also breathtaking. So I am so thrilled to welcome them, and I'm going to go really quickly through their bios to save time. It's much more interesting to hear from them anyway. Tali Farhadian Weinstein is an Iranian Jewish refugee, a prosecutor, professor, and proven criminal justice reformer. She was a law clerk for Judge Merrick B. Garland at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. You may know him as the nominee for United States Attorney General. And Tali also worked at the U.S. Department of Justice as counsel to Attorney General Eric Holder. She served as the general counsel of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Mohammed Abu Bakr is a Sudanese human rights activist and president of the African and Middle Eastern Leadership Partnership. I forgot missing the last word, AMEL, which he also founded. He has led many initiatives regarding human rights and peace programs in Darfur, Sudan, Israel, and the Palestinian territories, just to name a few. He's used his voice to promote refugee rights and humanitarianism since his arrival in the United States. Julio Casado is a dedicated nonprofit professional, the immediate past chairman of the board of La Unidad Latina Foundation, a community of socially conscious college graduates dedicated to the advancement of the Latino community nationwide. He is committed to the nonprofit community and has helped to form and grow a myriad of organizations. He's also the founder of Plant Inspired Future, an organic CBD company. And I should also just quickly add that Julio and I met at the Families Belong Together march in New York City a couple of years ago, protesting the Trump administration's family separation policy. And we immediately became friends and really have talked a lot about how to share our heritage and our commitment to advancing our communities together. So, it's an important story when, to tell other Zionesses that when you are showing up, you can find really remarkable partners to do this work with. And that's what it's all about. So I know we don't have a ton of time. I could have, an hour-long conversation, 5-hour conversation with all of you, but I would love for everyone to first hear your story. And so let's start with Mohammed.
Thank you, Amanda, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's really lovely being part of this panel. Bob, I'm a big fan of your work. Keep up the great work all over the world. Got intersected with the work of HIAS in many locations in Africa, in Europe, and here in the United States. And I'm a big fan of HIAS and all the work you guys are doing. My name is Mohammed Abu Bakr, born and raised in Sudan, been involved in these refugees umbrella that Bob mentioned earlier, working with different kind of communities who had to be removed from home for one reason or another, IDPs, refugees from different countries, and in the context of major conflict like Syria as well, on the other side of the world in Europe. It's certainly a very personal issue for me as well as an immigrant. I'm also a newcomer to the United States, relatively speaking. I came here just before the Trump election. Very interesting time to arrive to the United States, especially with Sudan on the top of the list of the travel ban that came not only a few days into the administration's in 2017. It's been an uphill battle, and it certainly put me right in front of the issues I've been talking about for so many years and working on. I just didn't see myself as as a need, someone who will need the advocacy that I've been doing on behalf of others. So it was a humbling experience, all in all. It was a good reminder of the human story behind each individual that we advocate on their behalf. Especially we say refugees, but we're not really expressing the full story of what someone goes through to the point they become a refugee. By the time one person is resettled here, they have gone through an exodus story of biblical proportions, with Passover coming around the corner. I don't know, exodus felt like the right word to use. The horrors that they go through is certainly of biblical proportions. And the process is tough. It's really tough, and made only a little easier by the work of organizations like HIAS and others. I'm excited to be part of the Shabbat and to hear from the rest of the panelists what they have to say.
All right, well, we're coming back from you to hear about your story in Sudan and in Darfur and how you created AMEL. So we'll come back to that. And Tali, tell us your story, please. An incredible story.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And it's such a joy to be here with you, Amanda and Bob and Mohammed and Julio. Thank you for convening together to celebrate Shabbat and to celebrate refugees. My story is actually a HIAS story. So I'm really glad to tell it tonight and to tell it in Bob's company. So I am from Iran. I was born in Tehran in what we think might be the oldest Jewish community intact in the world. And we had to leave because of the revolution that happened in 1979. Just chaos and instability swirling all around. People starting to disappear, couldn't go out really after dark. And then eventually it felt just too dangerous to be in the street. And my parents managed to get us over to Israel and then finally over to here. And, you know, as Amanda said, I went on to be a lawyer, and not just a lawyer, but a lawyer in law enforcement. And I often think back to how my trajectory probably started, that became inevitable from the moment of my arrival in the United States, because the first person that I ever met was a law enforcement officer. So I'm going to tell you that story, the first American I ever met. So my father had come a few months ahead of us to the US to sort of get his bearings. And my mother, my little brother, and I was about 4 years old, arrived on Christmas Eve of 1979, probably because the tickets were cheapest on Christmas Eve, if I had to go back and figure out why. And my mother had one-way tickets for us and tourist visas that she had bought from a broker that were probably fake, and unable to say what she needed to say at the border, which is that we had a fear of persecution in our homeland and we're here to seek asylum. And the INS officer, the law enforcement officer who inspected us at the airport, could have just said, he had the power to do this, to say, you know what, you have to turn around and go back. I'm just going to deport you on the spot. But instead, he said to this Jewish family from a majority Muslim country, it's Christmas, and the children have not seen their father in months. And he spoke from his humanity, right? And he said, come on in and collect yourself and come back to self-deport. And that was enough. That was enough to give me all of the blessings of my life as an American, because Bob, the next day, my mother was able to call a rabbi that she knew in Milwaukee, and he told her about HIAS. And the day after Christmas, we got onto the subway and got out at 14th Street and went to where the old HIAS offices used to be in downtown Manhattan and said, here we are, we need help. We are refugees. And they took us on the spot and stayed with us for 10 years as pro bono counsel, helping us to make our asylum claim and ultimately shepherding us through the amnesty process. And we got amnesty, and I became an American citizen in college.
Incredible. And I see Bob, he's like, he wants to jump in.
Yeah. This, I tell you, Tali, this is the ultimate reward of the work. Your story and being able to advance your dreams, and to know that an agency I deeply love and respect was pivotal in that journey. It's wonderful.
Thank you for everything you do. And this is just one story, right? There are just thousands upon thousands of these stories that were made possible because of HIAS's work. It is no exaggeration for me to say that I would not be here if not for HIAS and the work of the many, many people who devoted themselves to that organization and to refugees. So I thank you.
And what a privilege it is for all of us as Americans to have all of these people here with us that HIAS helped find home in America. And how lucky would we be to continue this work and to partner, to build on our partnership with HIAS so that we are all helping to find the Julios, the Mohammeds, and the Talis, and make sure that they can find a home here in America and continue contributing, what they are to our country. So Julio, I'm so excited to hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Shabbat Shalom. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But I'm an immigrant to this country as well. I came here when I was 4 years old, following likely a very similar model to other people. My grandaunt came. She brought her sister, who brought my mother, who then brought myself and my dad. What really kind of catapulted me into this work was a lot of the issues that were happening around Dreamers. It was the first time that I really became aware of how different immigrant stories can be, especially when when it comes to whether or not you're documented, right? Whether or not you quote unquote came here legally. And one of the greatest injustices that I felt happened was the idea that, you know, children who were brought here to this country, who made their lives here, were not being welcomed here, were not being accepted here, and were theoretically going to be sent back to a place that they've never known and a place that they, you know, don't call home. So that's really something that brought me into this space. At that time, I was chairman of La Unidad Latina Foundation. I do still serve on the board. And one of the initiatives that I pushed was dedicating a part of our scholarship program to Dreamers. Since the inception of LULF, we've never considered documentation or kind of legal status as a criteria for the scholarship, right? Because legal status is something that has always been an issue, I guess, in immigrants coming from Latin America. But we felt it was important to really call out the fact that we stand with Dreamers and support their stories and support, you know, their ability to go to college, to achieve an education, and to really fulfill a lot of the promises that, you know, our families made to themselves and to each other by coming here to this country. So that, you know, again, that's really what brought me into this work, what led me to being at the march where I met Amanda. And, you know, we bonded a lot over, you know, the causes that we're fighting for, you know, what our communities represent. I share a lot of kinship or a lot of gratitude towards the Jewish community, just from, you know, Bob, what you were saying earlier about the kindness of stranger. That kindness was shown to me a lot when I was younger. My two best friends, who are still my great friends to this day, you know, on nights that I didn't feel safe going home, they welcomed me into their home. Their families welcomed me. And it's something that has stood with me up until this point. So very happy to be here and happy to share anything and everything that, you know, will advance this work.
Thank you, Julio. And we're going to come back to you also to talk a little bit more about the work of LULF and, you know, how inspiring it is and how we can help to grow your work. So I would love to hear from all of you a little bit about why, you know, aside from your personal stories, why this work is so important for us as a national community, you know, forgetting, well, I know you can't actually divorce your own immigrant story from why you think this work is so important, but, you know, what does it mean for America when we are more accepting, when we are more open, when we think, as Mohammed, as you said, about the humanity of the people, instead of just calling them immigrants and refugees, think about what they're going through and what it means about us, what it says about us as a country when we are welcoming them. So I would love, whoever, Mohammed, let's start with you. And also please do tell a little bit about your personal story growing up and your work in Darfur and you know, the founding of AMEL, which is, you can't leave that out here.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, I actually want to go back to something that Robert said earlier, an expression that he used, reclaiming their right to life. I think that is the underlining thing here for me, for why do the work we do, because this is really about the most fundamental right of all, the right to life. And like people leave their country to become refugees for many reasons, some due to conflicts, others to you know, to atrocities of like unimaginable horrors, and others for persecution based on identity, be it LGBT persons, be it religious identity groups. And no matter how it starts, the process is equally hard. It's so daunting that what comes after the removal from the comfort of what you know. It's not an easy process by any means, and by the time they make it to a quote unquote safe country like the United States, another kind of horror begins for a lot of people. And it's by no means the lucky ones who just arrived here. Yes, they are lucky in the grand picture, of finally finding home and ending that story, but it's still not an easy one to adjust to a new country and to a new reality, and having to make it in your own in this unfamiliar place that you now have to call home. And I think we who stand in the side of refugees should be welcomed, whatever we call ourselves, liberals or or conservatives who stand for these issues are not as organized as those who hold a nativist position are. They agree on the basic minimum thing and they rally around it and they fight so strong and they are so successful at it. We are not. We are absolutely not nearly as successful. Otherwise, we would have been a much more open country here in the United States than it is right now. The fact that the quotas, even under the most liberal administrations that passed, were so low for a country like the United States of acceptance and resettlement is telling how we are not really doing our best. And for me, I think where I can see a value added to me to being present in this is to try to join as many communities and join together, band together, embarrass communities to work together to push for these issues and to push for more organizing around these fundamental values, because it's not an easy journey for refugees, and we all have to do our best to make it to do our best to get organized in order to make it better. The system is imperfect and will remain imperfect, but with a little bit of banding together, I think we can do a lot more for people to start reclaiming their life more efficiently.
Okay, and AMEL, please tell us.
Yeah, AMEL was founded to continue some of the work that I have done before coming to the United States. I alluded to it earlier, working with refugees, among other groups that we serve across Africa and the Middle East. Yeah, we rally them around we rally our activists and our volunteers and network around those fundamental rights supposedly granted by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are only granted if we guarantee it for others, working together to make sure that these are actually treated as rights and not privileges. And the only way to do it is to organize better. I think being in DC means that I gotta use my geographic location to advance what I can with policymakers. So Robert, I wanna work with you guys. I wanna work with whoever wants to stand for these issues to push as much as possible for better policies around refugees and immigration as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a thread there, something that you mentioned, Mohammed, about how America could be more open and how even under the most liberal presidents, the numbers of immigrants and refugees that we take in this country are low. And a lot of people talked about how President Obama deported so many, people from America. And of course, under President Trump, there was just so much rising xenophobia and so much fear and just so much horrible treatment of people who were seen as other. As Jews, we know what it is, how it feels to be seen as other. And, and it doesn't, the narratives don't actually connect really to the reality often. And so Tali, from a legal perspective, I would love to hear how you feel about the way that immigrants and refugees are, well, I know how you feel, but how we can address the fact that immigrants and refugees are often seen as dangerous. And there's this narrative that, people are coming from outside and externally, and they're bringing threats into this country. And with a few exceptions, really the threats are homegrown. The danger that we really see in America is really not coming overwhelmingly from refugees at all. So I would love for you to talk about your work related to that and how we spread that message, the truth, the reality, the facts to people who hear something else. It's easy to be afraid of someone. It's harder to see them as your brother or your sister.
So let me offer two responses to that, Amanda, and I'm glad you asked the question. I mean, first of all, it is important, and we've been talking about this, since January 6th, to recall that right now, the greatest sort of terror threat to our country is coming from domestic terrorism that is motivated by white supremacy. And, Judge Garland, my mentor and hero, who is on his way to becoming the Attorney General, he talked about this in his confirmation hearings, and he talked about how much he is drawing from his experience prosecuting the Oklahoma City bombing, which remains the most deadly act of domestic terrorism in American history, bringing all of that learning that he has from there to dealing with what happened in January 6th at the Capitol, and investigating and prosecuting that. And so I think that it really, what we have to fight, and what, to me, white supremacy and domestic terrorism represents, is hate. And it's the same, and that's really what we have to fight through law. And that's the same hate that motivates the kinds of gross and mean stereotypes that you just described. I think we also would all do a lot better, and I think about this a lot in my work, if we actually flipped it and understood it's not the non-citizen who is dangerous, but in fact, non-citizens are often the most vulnerable to every kind of crime. They really are the most vulnerable among us, for all of the reasons that you can imagine. People are afraid to report what happened to them. Sort of lack of understanding or lack of language might be a part of it. Prejudice is a part of it. So when I think about some of the crimes that I worry about, I think about, for example, hate crimes, and just how awful the surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans has been since the pandemic, because people make these gross associations between the virus and Asian Americans. And in New York, we've just seen so much more of this in the last few months. I think about wage theft and the fact that undocumented people and immigrants in general suffer so much more wage theft than citizens do, really money being stolen out of their pockets, right? Through pens and paper and computers, right? But theft nonetheless. I think about the victims of domestic violence, who often are non-citizen women, and one of the sort of instruments of control and coercion over them is to say, I can hurt you and you can't do anything about it, because if you go to the police, you are going to put yourself in danger of getting stuck in the immigration system. So, we all know that the measure of who we are can often be taken in how we treat the most vulnerable among us. And I try to bring that ethic to everything that I do. And when you see things that way, you think about the role of the immigrant in the criminal justice system really differently than the sort of the prejudice that you are fighting against, Amanda.
Can I just jump in? Just a couple supplementary points to what Talia is saying. In terms of crime profiles, before a refugee can get a refugee visa to come to the United States, they go through security vetting reviews conducted by 18 different federal agencies, generally taking about a year to a year and a half. And as a result, since the inception of the refugee program, there has not been one refugee who's committed a lethal crime in the United States, that is, a capital crime. So in terms of the, because I think there is an association of immigrant and criminal perpetrator, and that's simply wrong. And furthermore, again, as a general profile, refugees are really the ones who are really revitalizing kind of the proverbial American dream. They're the ones believing in the dignity and values of this country. Refugees, statistically, 82% of working eligible refugees are working, which is considerably higher than their US counterparts. So, I mean, this is a cohort of individuals who are investing and believing and revitalizing something very special of this country. But it's simply a misnomer. It's completely, and I look, everything that Talia is saying, which is that refugees become victims, not perpetrators of crime. But in addition, as an additional data point, is this whole vetting process, which really further minimizes the chances that individuals coming through the refugee program are criminally are going to be criminals.
Or are a threat in any sense. And Bob, I'm so glad you jumped in on that, because I was actually going to go to you anyway and say, you know, actually the inverse is true. There's this perception of refugees as being a threat, but actually they are, I think, because of what Tali mentioned, because they're afraid of you know, something happening, or you know, what a language barrier, that they are, they're really such contributors to America. And there's a video on the HIAS website that I really love about immigrants and refugees as essential workers, as healthcare providers in this country. I mean, they've saved us in this pandemic. And, you know, so the perception isn't just factually wrong, but it's just actually totally opposite of the reality. And if anyone wants to learn more about the ways that immigrants and refugees are contributing so fundamentally to, you know, what are the greatness of America, please check out the HIAS website. There's actually a whole bunch of videos that will really help you learn. And they're not just based in America, they're all over the world, but there are some that do talk about the American story. And I think they're incredibly powerful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Amanda, if I can just quickly add there as well.
You're not quickly, go ahead.
No, I mean, and that's what I see working with students every single day, right? We work with high school students, we help them prep to go into college, and really what we see in the immigrant community is resilience, right? You have to have resilience to leave your home country, to build a life for yourself and your children in a new place where you don't know the language, you don't know the laws, the systems are not built to accommodate you. And we have to celebrate that, right? We have to celebrate and engage immigrant communities and recognize their resilience, and empower them to pursue their dreams and to fulfill their dreams in this country, because it does benefit us all. It's proven study after study that immigrants, you know, this is a perception that we quote unquote take jobs, but we actually create way more jobs than we quote unquote take, because we're the entrepreneurs here, right? We're building new companies, and companies that extend well beyond ourselves. So, you know, fighting this perception is, I think, very, very important. And having these conversations, not just, you know, within ourselves, a community of immigrants, but going into other communities where they may not, you know, interact with immigrants as much, and presenting yourself and talking to them about your own struggle, your story, and helping them see that, you know, the resilience of the immigrant community lends to and helps build the resilience of this country, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, you preempted. I didn't even get to ask you the question because you knew what the question was going to be. You know, I would actually love, Julio, for you to talk a little bit about your family's experience, and to the extent that you want to, and your experience with your company, with Plan Inspired Future, and how it's a justice-oriented thing to make sure that you, as an immigrant, you know, as a person in the Bronx, are able to make a living on, you know, with this company, and also you could, if you want to talk about. You're really a serial entrepreneur in the nonprofit sense and the business sense, and you're doing so many different things with your hand in so many different pots. So, I mean, I've learned so much from you in the couple of years that we've known each other, and I'd love to just hear a little bit more about, you know, your work and all the things that you've done that really have been inspired in a lot of ways by your immigrant story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, my immigrant story is something that I grapple with all of the time, because in a lot of ways, you know, the first wave of immigrants that came here, as, you know, members of my family, were a lot of the negative stereotypes that they, you know, associate with immigrants, whether it be the quote unquote chain migration, which, you know, I hate that term. The fact that, you know, many of the men in my family were involved in, you know, illegal activities. At this point, they've almost all been deported. I was the first one in my family to go to college. And a lot of that came from a decision that my dad made to very much so separate himself from that kind of negative narrative and try to build a new one, right? So it's always been something that I've grappled with. And then, there came a certain moment in time in this country where we saw the laws start to change, right? Especially around cannabis. And companies start to pop up in this country, in Canada, and people starting to make a lot of money off of cannabis, something that men of color have been sent to jail for tens, decades at a time, some of them for their entire lives. Family members have been deported for. And I've always wondered, like, wow, if they only waited, right, or if they came a generation later, would they have been celebrated entrepreneurs instead? And that's a big part of why I decided to, use my skills and my knowledge to enter this space, because I see it more so than just an opportunity to build a business, but it is a justice issue. Like, we need people of color, we need immigrants in this space, especially people who have been adversely impacted by the war on drugs, right? Because the war on drugs extended not just in terms of what happened here, but it was also the destabilization of our countries back home that led to a lot of the waves of immigration of people coming over here. So it was like a double whammy. You get hit at home, then you come over here, you get hit here, you get sent to jail, and you get deported again. So that's a big part of why I'm in this work. And again, it's just to show that the ingenuity that it takes to build a business is something that is inherent, I believe, in the immigrant communities. A lot of the leadership skills that you need, a lot of the flexibility that you need, the ability to adapt, the ability to communicate, to sell, right? To sell yourself, to sell a product. That's something that I think we all carry. And it's something that I look to kind of bring into this space, as much as I can.
Well, thank you all so much. I have so many more questions, but I want to flip it to Rabbi Lisa Goldstein to do our Shabbat candle lighting. And I know she has a hard stop at 6:30. So I just really want to say thank you so much. I mean, I'm just, your friendship, your leadership, you are an inspiration, all of you. And I just feel so privileged to know you. I know I said that already, but it's really true. Every time I get to hear any of you speak, I feel emotionally so empowered and again, inspired by you and your work. So please enjoy your weekend. Shabbat Shalom, stay safe. And if you're joining us for the candle lighting, wonderful, but no pressure. So
I just want to say what a privilege it has been to listen to this incredible conversation and to really like hear the amazing stories and to really see the resilience and the dedication and the vision and the generosity that is so evident here. Like really, it's such an inspiring way to go into Shabbat. I'd like to share 3 quick scenes with you before we light the candles. The first is an airport in San Diego. So I lived for many years in San Diego, and one of the things that I really wanted to do while I was there was do some volunteering with Jewish Family Services through HIAS to be able to befriend a family. This happened to be a Karen family from Myanmar or Burma who had been living in a Thai refugee camp for about 15 years before finally getting permission to come to the US. And I would go to them once a week and work with them on English and helping them figure anything out. And I was like this crazy white woman who came over and played Jenga with their kids and taught them, played Uno with them to teach them colors and numbers. And but one day they called and said they had family members who just got permission to come. And it was a brother and a number of children, and they didn't know how they were going to pick them up because they didn't have a car. And I said, you know what? I'll go with you to pick them up at the airport. And so I went, and they were totally confused. This poor family carrying all of their belongings in these like garbage bags, basically. And the just the relief and the joy and the poignancy, the heartbreak of this family being reunited and then coming in my car all the way back to their home to start this life in this new country with some support it was one of the just greatest privileges of my life to be part of that. So that's scene 1. Scene 2 is on a subway in the Bronx, here in New York, and it's with a man who I'm going to call Aziz. Aziz is from a small village in West Africa where he received, he never had the opportunity to go to school. He is illiterate in every language, including his own language and French, which is the colonial language of West Africa. He is gay. And when his family found out that he was gay, they invited his lover over and first tried to poison him. And when that didn't work, they actually beat him to death. And Aziz managed to get to the United States. You can only imagine the kind of trauma and terror and sense of being completely lost, and managed to get here. And he was on the subway in the summer of 2016. So, after the 2016, just before the 2016 election. And he ran into a young man, a 16-year-old kid, did not speak English, who himself was from his country and who had just managed to get here by himself and was completely lost. And this young man went up to Aziz and, recognizing the native language he was speaking on his cell phone, and said, "Can you help me?" And Aziz could have said no, but said, "Yes, I can help you. What is your story?" And managed to get this young man connected to an attorney who managed to help this young man get asylum. And that kid is actually my foster kid. He's been living with us now for 3 years. And he's in his second semester of college here all remote, but he's in his second semester of college, and he is flourishing and asks me pretty much every 6 months, "When can I apply for my passport?" And he has his green card, and hopefully that will be very soon. And we just celebrated 3 years together as a family. So that's scene 2. So scene 3 is very long ago in the mythic Sinai Desert, where the Israelites have just completely screwed up and worshipped a false idol. And Moses, their leader, is so frustrated and doesn't know how to move forward, and says to God, "How do I know? How can I follow? Who are you? Tell me more who you are." And God revealed these 13 attributes of mercy, of compassion, and said, which are the basis of how we are supposed to be as Jews in the world. We are supposed to imitate those qualities of compassion. And God further said to Moses, "You can't really understand me. It's so much bigger than you. But hine makom iti, here is this place with me where you can stand and you can see what my attributes are." And I feel like our responsibility as Jews is to say, "Hine makom iti, there is a place here with me, a place for all those, for the tired, poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as the promise is on the Statue of Liberty." And I really feel like that is our opportunity and that is our responsibility. And why else are we here? Truly, why else are we here? So with that, I'm going to take you on a little tour through my living room, over to where the candles are. So you can see the sun. Maybe you can see the sun is setting outside. And I hope this works. So some of you may also have candles that you would like to light. I always think that lighting candles is this extraordinary, mystical act of lighting the match, and suddenly there's more light. This is what Shabbat is for. This is what our lives are for, to just bring more and more and more light. So if you would like, please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Blessed are you, life force of the world that manifests in every single human being, who gave us the commandments of lighting the Shabbat candles in order to help us bring more holiness into the world. Amen.
Rabbi Goldstein, I didn't even do your
Shabbat
bio.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to close by thanking everyone for joining us. It was such a privilege having all of our speakers here. I'm gonna pin you all back, everyone who's left. Donnie's camera's off, but I'm bringing her back. Donnie, come back. I just really wanted to say thank you and see if anyone has any last words. We do have a couple of minutes and there's a question that I would love to see if anybody wants to take. First of all, sure, it's Rabbi Lisa Goldstein. Just kidding. Everyone's registered as Rabbi Lisa Goldstein. What a wonderful panel with such phenomenal perspectives. I am an Iranian American Jew who is committed to making our civics, politics, and democracy more accessible to my community, especially because they fled or immigrated from a country where they did not know or enjoy democracy. What is your best advice for how best to engage a traditionally disengaged and disenfranchised community in our democratic and political system, especially in this time of great division and polarization? Thought it might be a nice way to close, actually, to take that question and see what inspiring words you all have to make sure that we are bringing with us the positivity from this panel and really inspiring to take action as we move forward.
I'm going to maybe just kick things off. I think it's a great question. And it really, I mean, it's so profound that how do you create something positive when there's so much negativity in word and deed right now? I tend to think that the first step is one of education. And education is not necessarily something that has to be delegated to professionals. I mean, that is, if there are mentors in the community, if there's there's this wonderful individual I've gotten to know from Chicago. I think he's originally from Ethiopia. It doesn't matter where he came. He came as a refugee, and he's creating this series of YouTube videos to instruct and inspire individuals on their possibilities. And again, to my mind, that is education, and education that is being provided by someone of great authenticity. So is that a perfect answer? No, but I think it's at least possibly a start.
I also think getting to know people, because like the places where I feel like I've made big change in the way that I think about things happens through because I meet someone that I like who embodies a different experience that I hadn't known before. And that can happen one-on-one, but it can also happen with just somebody telling their story. I mean, we heard such amazing stories, and there are so many people who can tell moving and profound stories where people go, wow, like I didn't even know that. I want to be connected with this in some way. And so I think that human interaction and hearing people's stories is a really additional great way.
Rabbi Lisa, to follow up on that, I know there's a local organization here in Minnesota called Green Card Voices that does exactly that. It interviews people with green cards to hear, understand, and then retell their stories. And they have, when we can all meet in person again, they have sort of a traveling exhibit of these stories, and they've created some digital accompaniment to hear more of that. I'll try to share it in the chat.
So I'm going to close by reading, I'm just pulling it up, from the HIAS resource for National Refugee Shabbat. And I want to really encourage everyone to check out the HIAS website and look at this resource. It's really comprehensive. There's something for everyone. There are events happening all weekend. There's a HIAS event tomorrow and another one on Sunday that you can register for, where you can learn more about the work that HIAS specifically is doing, but there are also Refugee Shabbat items happening or events happening all over the country. So, you could either reach out to your local synagogue and see if they're having one, or to your local, Jewish community organization, or just make sure you're following and that you are doing one of these next year, or, helping to build the National Refugee Shabbat in your community in the future. I know that, Zioness will be continuing this work. So please feel free to join us, but the more Refugee Shabbat events that are happening, the better, the more people that we can reach. So I'm actually also going to put this in the chat, this reading, which is so beautiful. So everyone can feel free to share it and to read it either at your Shabbat table or your Saturday night plans or whatever it is that you're doing, even if it's on Zoom in the pandemic. And so here it is. I don't have a cup of wine, I have an iced tea. So we lift this cup with words remembering our ancestors' exodus from Egypt on our lips. Zecher l'Yetziat Mitzrayim. As we recall that ancient journey from slavery to freedom, we think also of the many times throughout history that our people have wandered in search of safety. From Tsarist Russia to the horrors of the Holocaust, to persecution in Iran, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, Ethiopia, and beyond, time and time again, we have found ourselves forced out of our homelands for being who we are. But each time we were held together by community and assisted by those who risked their safety in protection of ours. We continued to survive against all odds as our hearts grew to hold others who would come to experience what we had. We fill our Kiddush cup to overflowing, hoping that the joy of Shabbat will spread into the week to come. And so it is as we welcome refugees and asylum seekers into our communities today. Recalling our exodus from Egypt, the Torah tells us, you know the soul of the stranger. While our responsibility to protect the rights of refugees and asylum seekers does not derive from our experience in Egypt, that experience does amplify our obligation to welcome. May our commitment to welcome fill to overflowing just as our kids, leading us to take bold action in support of refugees and asylum seekers from every corner of the earth. Just as the Jewish people have thrived, so too do today's refugees of all faiths and ethnicities thrive as they rebuild their lives and become part of their new communities. We lift this cup with the words remembering the ingenuity of creation on our lips. Zikaron lamaaseh bereshit. We continue creating and repairing the world as we build our communities on the collective strength of each individual, remembering that we are stronger and strongest when we come together. And so if you do that reading, I would also encourage everyone to think about your family's immigrant or refugee story to the United States, because every Jew has one. You are an immigrant or a refugee from somewhere. And so to recall your family's story and to think about your family's experience becoming American, I think is a great way to think about our obligation to help others who are just doing now what we did, one generation, 2 generations, or 3 generations ago. So on that note, I want to thank you all so much again. This was so powerful for me, and I hope it was for all of you participating and everyone watching. And I want to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, and have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.